Hey everyone, welcome to the show.
Great to be here.
You ever get that feeling? Are we sort of sleepwalking while the very foundations of American liberty are being, I don't know, quietly eroded?
It's a potent feeling, that sense that something valuable might be slipping away.
Exactly. Ronald Reagan actually warned about this, didn't he? That freedom isn't just handed down.
Right, he said it's something you have to fight for, generation after generation, a battle we always need to wage.
Okay, so let's really unpack that sense of urgency today, because this time we're diving deep into Sean Hannity's Live Free or Die, America and the World on the Brink.
Which is definitely a work of political commentary and analysis. It lays out a very specific perspective.
It does. And if you want to follow along or read it yourself, you can find a link to grab a copy on Amazon right there in the description.
Good idea.
And hey, if this kind of deep dive is your thing, please do hit that like button and subscribe. It really helps us out, and you won't miss future discussions. So our mission today, really, is to get inside Hannity's arguments. Understand what he sees as this radical left agenda, why he thinks American patriotism, rooted in both ideals and history, is so crucial.
And the history part is key for him.
It is. And also this constant vigilance he calls for to protect constitutional liberties.
And what's immediately striking, I think, is how he frames the current moment. He presents it as a genuine crisis point for American freedom.
Absolutely. He doesn't ease into it. There's a real sense of high stakes right from the start, especially in how he assesses the political left.
Yeah, if you look at the narrative he's building, it seems pretty clear he views the Obama administration as a major turning point.
He does. He says quite directly, actually, that he raised concerns about what he calls Barack Obama's radical background years ago.
And connects that to Obama's pursuit of, what's the term he uses, statist ambitions.
That's it, statist ambitions, which in Hannity's view are fundamentally opposed to the vision of the Founding Fathers.
And he argues this paved the way, I think is his phrase.
Yes, paved the way. For the radical left, he believes now dominates the Democratic Party.
It's a strong causal link he's drawing there. He even suggests the Bernie Sanders movement wouldn't have gained the traction it did without that groundwork.
He does. And then he goes further, arguing that today's progressivism isn't just, a different political viewpoint.
No, he calls it intrinsically radical.
Right. With an ultimate goal, he claims, of pushing the country towards socialism, maybe even authoritarianism.
So the core message seems to be, don't get complacent.
Exactly. Never let your guard down. He argues this left needs to be defeated both in the battle of ideas and, of course, at the ballot box.
It's interesting how he defines radical, isn't it? It seems to be anchored in his specific understanding of America's founding principles.
Meaning any significant deviation from that understanding gets labeled as radical.
Precisely. Which, reminds us that radical can be a relative term. Its meaning can shift depending on the context, the historical period.
That's a really good point. Ideas once seen as radical sometimes become mainstream later on.
And vice versa. It adds a layer to think about when evaluating claims like these.
Okay, so moving from that warning about the left, let's pivot to patriotism. How does Hannity define that?
Well, he argues it's more than just agreeing on principles, like liberty or equality.
Okay.
It also involves embracing a shared national identity, shared history. He actually quotes the historian Wilfred Maclay on this.
Oh, yeah. What does Maclay say?
That we need to know both our creed, so our ideals, and our culture, our shared experiences, our stories, our traditions.
So it's head and heart, in a way. Ideas and belonging.
That seems to be the gist. And Hannity stresses remembering and teaching key historical moments. You mentioned some earlier.
Right, like Lexington and Concord, Independence Hall, Gettysburg. He sees these as foundational.
Not just dates and places, but narratives that shape who we are as Americans, and they need to be actively passed on.
And he worries that's not happening, or happening incorrectly.
He expresses concern about what he calls a revisionist version of American history, which he attributes to the left.
And he believes this revisionism undermines appreciation for freedom.
That's his argument. For him, true patriotism means actively protecting the Constitution, upholding core values, ensuring laws apply equally.
And safeguarding the American people themselves. That's the package he presents.
This idea of patriotism needing both ideals and a shared story is pretty significant. It suggests national unity needs more than just abstract agreement.
It needs that sense of shared heritage, collective memory, like you said.
Which then raises questions, of course, about how we build and pass on those national stories, whose narratives get emphasized.
And Hannity clearly has a specific foundational narrative in mind, focused on certain events and values he sees as essential for unity.
Right. And according to him, this shared history is deeply tied to the nation's founding principles, even its religious roots.
Okay, let's unpack that connection. He talks about the early colonists, right? Seeking religious and political liberty.
Exactly. He argues that was a major driving force behind setting up self-governing colonies in the first place.
And he links the idea of government by social contract to church covenants. That's interesting.
Yeah, particularly in New England. The idea that congregations chose their leaders, set their own rules,
Yeah.
he suggests that influenced political thinking.
He brings up Alice Baldwin's work too, doesn't he, about the clergy's role.
He does, highlighting how they helped popularize ideas like natural rights and the social contract before the Revolution,
And then there are examples like John Winthrop's City Upon a Hill.
and Thomas Hooker's Fundamental Orders of Connecticut. He presents these as early links between, specifically, covenantal Christianity and governance.
Now, he does acknowledge Enlightenment ideas played a role too.
Yes, but he emphasizes what he sees as the dominant influence of a Christian worldview in shaping the founding document.
He even cites Jefferson saying the Declaration was meant to be an expression of the American mind.
Implying that mind was largely shaped by Christian thought at the time.
And he worries that today's left misrepresents Christianity, portrays it as authoritarian.
That's his concern, yes. That they paint it as somehow incompatible with political liberty, which he strongly refutes.
It's definitely a complex picture, the mix of religious and philosophical ideas back then.
It really is. And while the author highlights the influence of covenantal thought, it's worth remembering the sheer diversity of viewpoints during the founding era. Scholars still debate the precise weight of each influence.
Good point. It wasn't monolithic. Okay, so tied into this founding vision is the idea of checks and balances. How does Hannity discuss that?
He leans heavily on James Madison's perspective, explaining that the Constitution was cleverly designed
How so?
to sort of leverage human weaknesses, you could say, by creating competing interests, separate branches of government.
The idea being they'd constrain each other, prevent any one part from getting too powerful.
Exactly. It's a system designed to maximize liberty by managing rather than ignoring inherent human tendencies like ambition.
But he also argues the framers knew these structural checks weren't enough on their own.
Right. That's a crucial point he makes. They believed these mechanisms needed something else to work properly.
Which was?
Virtue. Specifically, what the author frames as Christian moral standards. He argues the founders saw this as indispensable for liberty to last.
And he quotes some founders on this.
He does. John Adams, saying the Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people.
Wholly inadequate to the government of any other. I think that's the quote.
That's the one. And Samuel Adams, arguing that virtue is the best security for a free state.
So the structure needs a moral foundation to function, in this view.
That's the argument. This emphasis on virtue being necessary for a republic is a common theme in conservative thought.
And it raises questions, doesn't it? Like, where does that virtue come from? What role does religion play in fostering it?
Absolutely. While the founders often spoke of virtue, what exactly they meant and the precise role they envisioned for religion in public life are still debated today.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly to the author's critique of progressivism. This is a distinct historical movement he targets.
Yes, the early 20th century movement. He argues its main goal was to significantly expand the federal government's power and reach.
And that they saw the Constitution as, what, an obstacle?
Pretty much. An outdated barrier to implementing their vision for fixing society's problems through government action.
And he characterizes progressives as believing in a sort of elite class of experts.
Right, a self-appointed elite managing an administrative state, making decisions for the populace.
He also claims they favored equal outcomes over the founders' focus on equal opportunity. Is that right?
That's his contention, yes. And he traces this expansion of government through presidencies like Woodrow Wilson, FDR, LBJ.
Then he jumps forward to the 60s and 70s, talking about a long march through the institutions. What's that about?
He suggests that radical leftists at that time adopted a strategy to embed themselves within key societal institutions.
Like universities, media.
Exactly. Education, media, law, entertainment. The idea being to slowly shift culture and politics from within.
And he links this to moral relativism, arguing it undermines freedom.
He does. He contrasts it with what he sees as the Judeo-Christian understanding of inherent human dignity, which he believes is essential for protecting God-given rights.
So he draws a line connecting today's left back to that progressive era.
He does, while also suggesting that today's version is perhaps even more radical than the original progressives were generally seen to be.
It's a very critical take on progressivism, obviously.
Definitely.
Huh.
Highlighting its departure from a more limited government philosophy. It's worth remembering, though, that progressivism itself arose as a response to major changes.
Industrialization, poverty, inequality.
Right. Its proponents argued for a more active government to tackle those issues. That fundamental disagreement about the role of government is still central to American politics.
So bringing it to the present, how does the author specifically characterize what he calls the modern left's agenda? He gets quite detailed.
He does. He basically asserts the Democratic Party has become the party of socialism.
Strong words. What specifics does he list?
A whole range. Open borders, sanctuary cities, eliminating ICE, underfunding the military, abortion on demand.
He mentions infanticide allegations too, right?
Yes, those allegations are included.
Mm.
Also, environmental extremism, gun confiscation, higher taxes, radical identity politics.
And suppressing free speech and religious expression. Even anti-Semitism among some.
That's all part of his characterization. He specifically targets the Green New Deal, calling it socialism disguised as environmentalism.
Why? What aspects does he focus on?
Its goals: eliminating fossil fuels, completely overhauling transportation, retrofitting all buildings. He even brings up a former AOC staffer supposedly admitting the real goal was economic transformation.
He's also critical of Medicare for all.
Very much so. He sees the push among Democratic candidates for more government health care as deeply problematic.
What about reparations? For slavery or for Native Americans?
He opposes them, cites huge economic cost, but also argues they would be racially inflammatory.
And he uses historical examples to warn against socialism.
Yes, stark ones. Soviet Russia, Venezuela, East Germany. He links the ideology directly to authoritarianism, economic collapse, and violence.
Does he quote anyone?
He quotes Lenin ordering violence against kulaks and statements from Trotsky, connecting the ideology to brutality.
And Bernie Sanders' popularity, how does he frame that?
As a flashing red warning sign. He points to Sanders' past praise for regimes like the USSR and Cuba.
And mentions those Project Veritas videos that purported to show campaign workers expressing radical views.
Right. It's a comprehensive indictment from his perspective.
It certainly is, a very detailed list of concerns reflecting his specific ideological viewpoint on the Democrats.
And, for anyone listening, it's really vital to approach these kinds of claims critically. Look for evidence, seek out different perspectives on these complex issues.
Good advice. Comparing historical socialist states requires care, too, considering the unique contexts.
Exactly. Avoiding overly simple comparisons is important.
Now, besides the policy agenda, Hannity also focuses a lot on efforts he believes were aimed at undermining Donald Trump.
Yes, that's a significant portion of his analysis. He discusses the narrative around the deep state.
The Russia collusion investigation.
The impeachment proceedings.
Yeah.
He argues these were primarily politically motivated attempts to delegitimize Trump.
And the media's role in this.
He's highly critical. Accuses the media of clear bias against Trump, acting as a loyal mouthpiece, he says, for the resistance.
Does he give examples?
He cites patterns of negative coverage and what he sees as double standards in reporting.
He also talks about cancel culture, framing it as, what, a leftist tactic?
Yes, a radically intolerant tactic used by the left, in his view, to silence anyone holding views they find objectionable.
And this extends to college campuses.
He expresses alarm about threats to free speech on campuses, alleged discrimination against conservative groups.
What about social media?
Similar concerns. He discusses perceived bias against conservatives on major platforms and suggests Democrats want these companies to police speech more aggressively.
While he opposes campaign finance reform on free speech grounds.
Correct. And finally, he touches on what he describes as the left's assault on religious liberty.
How so?
Pointing to opposition to things like Christian symbols in public, and even questioning the need for religious liberty protections themselves.
So his analysis of the anti-Trump efforts is definitely presented through a lens of political bias and maybe persecution.
That's fair to say.
Yeah.
And again, for listeners, it's important to be aware of the official investigations, the reports, the wide range of interpretations out there from different news sources and commentators on all these events.
Debates about media bias, free speech, content moderation, they're incredibly complex.
They really are. involving competing rights and values.
Okay, so despite all those perceived attacks and concerning agendas, the author does dedicate space to what he sees as President Trump's achievements.
Yes, he offers a positive assessment of the administration's record in several areas.
Like the economy.
He highlights the state of the economy before the pandemic, points to low unemployment, growth in manufacturing jobs, rising middle-class income,
Well,
actions taken against China on trade, which he viewed as unfair practices, efforts to rebuild the military, reforms to veterans' health care.
the judicial appointments are mentioned too, right?
Definitely. The appointment of judges with an originalist judicial philosophy is presented as a major success.
Anything else on his list?
He emphasizes the administration's focus on promoting religious freedom, both internationally and at home. Border security efforts are noted.
And the response to the coronavirus. How does he frame that?
He defends the administration's early response, particularly the travel restrictions imposed on China, and criticizes what he saw as negative media narratives around it.
So it's a counter-narrative highlighting successes across several policy fronts.
It is. And as with any evaluation of an administration, it's helpful for listeners to compare these claims with data from various sources, consider the broader context, and understand that interpretations often vary based on political perspectives.
Absolutely. So as we've explored, this book lays out a very distinct perspective on the challenges and stakes facing America right now.
Indeed. This deep dive into Hannity's arguments really shows a profound concern from his viewpoint about the direction of American politics, American culture. He draws a very sharp line between what he holds as founding principles and the agenda he sees in the modern left.
Okay, let's bring our deep dive toward a close then. Leaving Independence Hall, Benjamin Franklin was asked what kind of government they'd created.
Ah, the famous quote.
Right. A republic if you can keep it. Just amazing how much weight is in that little phrase, isn't it?
It really is a challenge almost.
It feels like it.
Yeah.
So for you listening right now, after hearing this exploration of the author's perspective in Live Free or Die, what do you think your role is in safeguarding American liberties, given the challenges discussed?
It's a big question. Where do you find that balance between individual freedom and our collective responsibility as citizens?
Yeah. And do the principles, the concerns Hannity raises in this book, do they resonate with your vision for America's future? Or maybe push against it? Definitely something vital to think about.
Food for thought, for sure.
Well, thank you so much for taking this deep dive with us today. We'd genuinely love to hear your thoughts. What was your favorite insight or maybe a key takeaway from our chat? Let us know in the comments below.
Yeah, we're always interested to hear what aspects stood out or what other topics related to this you might want us to explore down the road.
Please do. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed this discussion and want more like it.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for listening.